Yeah, that's a great introduction talking about Father Boyle, because he really illustrates the point I was making last week, which is that the church is an essential service. I mean, I don't see how you could see it any other way when you look at Father Boyle. What he's done, as I think Ivan just said, to reduce crime in the inner city of LA far exceeds anything the government programs have done. So it's our need for the church, our need to be together is essential, which is kind of why we're all here today. You had the sense this is important for me to get up this early. I don't know if you're like me, but I'm sleeping a lot more. I'm sleeping in more now because of COVID. I just moved my appointments later in the day because I don't have to drive. So I appreciate you all getting up early for us to talk about these things. So let's start with a prayer. Let's do that. Lord, we're grateful that you have blessed us with this ability to get together. Thank you for motivating these people to rise and shine and to take a look at the stress and anxiety in our world and figure out how we could respond a little bit more like Jesus. We pray, Lord, that you would come and be the teacher today, that you would give us a sense of connection that gives us a little spring in our step the rest of the day. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Well, the series, it's a two-part series, last week and today, is on dealing with social isolation. We've been asked by our government to distance socially. And as a psychologist, I think it's important for us to take a look at what that means for us. Last week, as you remember, I read for you what had just come out last Friday in terms of the government's mandates in California for our behavior. The government has asked us specifically to isolate socially, and they've spelled it out. This is not asking, they're telling you. It's now a mandate. I just want to say it again, that the Department of Public Health has mandated as of a week ago, gatherings cannot include more than 3 households, because they're looking forward to Thanksgiving this next week, right? So they're telling you can't have more than 3 households together, must be outdoors. You can only remove your mask when you're actively eating or drinking. So you have to have your mask on, take a drink, put the mask back on. That's the rule. No singing, chanting, or shouting. It's prohibited indoors. You can do that outdoors, but it's prohibited indoors. So those are the rules. That's what the government rules. Spelled out by our governor, who's offered us those guidelines. This Wednesday, I'm sure most of you saw it, the New York Times wrote a headlines that said, for California governor, coronavirus messages, do as I say, not as I dine. California's Democratic leaders have put strict measures in place, if only they would follow them. I'm sure you've all heard this. Yeah, I see the heads nodding. Right. Pictures now have come out that Gavin Newsom himself was at a private party of 10 people in a room up in Napa Valley at the French Laundry. Now, I've never been there. I think, Carolyn, you've been there, haven't you? Other people have been out there at the French Laundry. Very nice place. No one wore masks. They were sitting right next to each other. And 2 California Medical Association executives were in the party. So it's quite sobering for us to have these strict guidelines come out and then find out that our leaders are not following the guidelines. Now, he's apologized and said, oh, it was outdoors. Well, it wasn't. The room was indoors, and it had sliding glass doors that opened to the outdoors, but they had to close those doors because they were shouting and yelling so much indoors, obviously violating all of his guidelines. Now, I say that, and I know most of you have heard this, right? Not so that we can throw stones at whatever party you throw stones at, because believe me, you don't want to start throwing stones if you're in any political party today. So that's not why I'm bringing that up. I'm bringing it up because all of us need to be together. Even our leaders who are saying, hey, don't be together, need to be together. He couldn't help himself. We need to be together. We need to find ways to be together. And even if you throw out these strict guidelines that are unbelievably strict, what you find is people can't follow them. And they can't follow them because they need to be together. Now, we have to come up with ways to respect our physical distancing that we need, but take into account the social connection that we need. We need to figure out to do both. When you leave one out, then people are going to lie and cheat and overcompensate and hide. They're going to want to do things to be together because they're told they can't be together at all. This is my I say contribution to the conversation. I think we need to follow the physical distancing guideline, but let's stop calling it social distancing. Let's call it physical distancing and social connection. We need to be connected. That's why you're all here today. We've figured out how to use Zoom, even at our age. Maybe you've had to have your kids help you like I did. How do I do this? And can I show my screen? And can I make it big and small? And we're figuring it out. Why? Because we know we need social connection. We don't need social distance. We need physical distance in order to deal with this virus, which is exploding again, as you all know. So I want to be clear. And I think the governor actually agrees with me that we need to follow the CDC guidelines to try to deal with this virus. America is not doing a good job. We need to do a better job. But at the same time, we need to find ways to stay connected socially, that this is essential. And in my opinion, church is essential. It's an essential service. As we were just talking about before many of you came on, we're talking about Father Boyle and what he's done to reduce crime in LA far exceeds anything the police or any government agency has done. It's an essential service. You cannot say that isn't an essential service. And it comes out of the church. There are many, many programs that are reducing crime extremely effectively that come out of the church. So what you're doing today, you being here today, is essential. I want to make that point. And we're doing the best we can to create physical distance while recognizing our need for social connection. I think it's a fundamental human need that needs to be acknowledged. And if you don't acknowledge it, you're going to find yourself like Gavin Newsom, acting out and on the sly, getting together with his friends. And you should see the picture of him laughing. He's almost slapping the back of the guy next to him. They're that close. They're like inches from each other, laughing and making so much noise that they had to close the doors, violating all of his rules. Why? Because you were created to need that kind of exchange. And if we don't acknowledge that, we're going to find ways of cheating and breaking the rules. So let's figure out what the physical rules are that best help us. What mask, what kind of mask, all the research keeps changing on that. This kind of mask is better than that kind. Wearing it protects other people, not yourself. Have you read those articles? Don't tell Americans that wearing a mask only protects other people. They'll never wear it. You have to tell them it protects themselves or they won't wear it. That's kind of an interesting statement on us as Americans. But we need to figure out what we need to do physically, acknowledging our need for social connection. And then people are more likely to do it. If you give them all of what they need, they're more likely to follow the instructions. If you don't acknowledge what they need, they're likely to cheat and not follow the instructions. So let's just be honest. Yes, we need physical distance and we need social connection. Let's figure out how to do that and not end up cheating, which is what we would all do. I'm not saying Newsom's any better or worse than any of us. He's just human and needs these kinds of social connections just like you do. Let me read you another verse from Genesis. I read a different one last week. Genesis 1. Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over the livestock and all the wild animals and over all the creatures and move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. Now, that's an interesting passage, don't you think? He says, let's make mankind in our image, plural. So it's Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, as far as our Judeo-Christian theology goes, that was there in the beginning. They're timeless. And they decide to make mankind in our image, male and female, he created them. So many theologians have made a lot out of that passage. So you probably thought this, I've thought this. Well, what is the image of God? You're the image of God. All people bear the image of God. All created people bear the image of God. What is that? Many theologians have said it's the capacity for relationship. That's why he made them male and female, to relate. And he said, let us make mankind in our image, plural. Let's make them relational. And as a psychologist, I love that particular take. I mean, the image of God means lots of things. It doesn't just mean that, but certain theologians have zeroed in on this passage to say, I think maybe that's how we are most in the image of God. When we are relating healthily, what Buber called in an I-thou fashion. When I relate to you as an other that's a person, not an I-it. If I relate to people as things, this is not me living out my image of God. As I relate to them as persons, it is. So we are created to long for and to need to connect to other persons. And that then manifests the image of God. And there's a number of people in psychology who think that's why therapy works. Why therapy works is because we create circumstances so that the image of God is most manifest, where I can be the truest version of myself with someone else who can be the truest version of their self, and God shows up to do the healing. That's when healing takes place. When we live out this Genesis chapter 1 passage, when I am relating to other people in the most authentic way and they're relating to me in the most authentic way, that's where healing takes place. That's what the church is, or supposed to be, where we can show up and we can be the most authentic version of ourselves, I to you and you to me. God shows up and healing takes place. We become better people. That's why Father Boyle can do what he does. All he does is create an atmosphere where the image of God shows up. He doesn't have to, give them the 4 spiritual laws or ask them, where would you be if you died tonight and you need Jesus to get into heaven. He doesn't need to have those conversations with them. He just needs to show up and have an authentic presence with them, and God shows up. And that's where healing takes place, and people become a better version of themselves when we are connected, and we're connected authentically. How can you not say that's essential? That is essential. It's essential for us living the best lives we can, for getting healing in whatever way you need healing in your life. We get that when we are walking and living and getting together and reminding each other, this is what it means to live out the image of God in your life, to be who God has called you to be. You've been created to live above your circumstances in a particular way of authenticity. And when you live that way, it heals you and heals everyone around you. So that's my argument. You cannot leave that out of the formula. God is fundamentally relational. He's created us to be fundamentally relational. That's an essential aspect of who we are. And whatever we're doing to fight this virus together, whatever the medical people are telling me, I'm listening to them. I wear my mask all the time. I was embarrassed yesterday. I was going to a car dealership. My car had to be worked on. Of course, my car breaks down. I don't even drive the thing and it breaks down. I know, isn't that ironic? I'm not going to tell you how much it's going to cost me to fix it. And I get out of my car to go in, and I'm so distraught, that I don't have my mask on. And I get out of my car and I get into the dealership, and I get all these looks. All these people are looking at me, like, what's wrong with you? And then it occurred to me, why these people, I didn't have my mask on, right? I need to have it on. We all know that. We're all trying to follow the rules. They're telling us that it's helpful. We're trying to do it. I'm not arguing with that. I'm saying we want to add something to these rules, which is the importance of us connecting in an authentic way. I'm not saying don't wear your mask. I'm not saying that. I'm saying wear it. Physical distancing may be necessary right now. Social isolation is toxic. We talked about this last week, that the government needs to emphasize that, because we've seen the effects of isolation. Owsley County in Kentucky is the poorest county in our country. It's a primarily Caucasian county. That's the poorest county per income of household in the United States, because it's isolated. It's in the Appalachians, and they can't get to other people, and other people can't to them. So there's no trade. It's all that isolation is devastating for us financially, economically, spiritually, emotionally. As you know, many of you know, I've spent a fair amount of time at the largest maximum security prison in the country. And you know what we consider the most severe punishment in prison? Isolation. Exactly. What are we going to do to punish that guy for acting out? We're going to put him in solitary confinement. That'll show him. So we isolate people to punish them psychologically, Now, I have to tell you, it doesn't work. I've been there. And when they let them out of solitary confinement, they're just mad. They didn't really learn anything. So we do it to punish, and it hurts people, but it doesn't make them better. You don't get better in isolation. It's contrary to what's actually needed to help people get better, but it is punishing. You want to punish somebody, lock them up in total isolation. So isolation creates psychological problems for us, and that's what we want to address. The psychological problems with extended isolation is fear and excessive worry are a natural byproduct of that. You isolate someone long enough, fear and excessive worry necessarily come out of that. That's why you're finding yourself more reactive and worrying about stuff that you didn't worry about before. Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to have enough in retirement? Is he okay? Is that person okay? Are my kids okay? They're worried about you coming over to visit them because you're going to get sick, and that worry gets intensified in isolation. People have difficulty sleeping. They have concentration difficulties. We have now a spike in anxiety and depression. Both anxiety and depression, the two big ones in psychology, are now spiking because of the isolation that we're all living with. If you had a chronic health condition, it will get worse in isolation. We find that it doesn't help. We're on the lookout for all these things. And as you already know, we see excessive use of tobacco, alcohol, and substances during isolation. All of us, you're all drinking and eating too much. Overeating's going on too. Me too. You're trapped and you want to do something to make yourself feel better. The easiest thing is to open a bottle of wine or eat something. We're self-medicating what? Our anxiety and our depression. We're self-medicating. So we need connection. Bring a friend to SCL. Set up Zoom meetings. Call that person you haven't talked to in years. This is important. It's essential. It is not a luxury. It's not silly. It's important. I called my nephew yesterday that I hadn't spoken to in years. The guy's having a lot of problems. I didn't know that. Well, I kind of knew it. I was hurrying through the grapevine, but I hadn't talked to him. I called him to talk to him, and it was a very meaningful moment. We didn't talk for that long, but for a few minutes. He actually thought his other Uncle Mark was calling him. He was very excited when he got the call. Oh, Uncle Mark, good to hear from you. He said one or two things. I said, no, I'm the other Uncle Mark. Oh, okay, good to hear from you too. That's how long it had been since I've talked to him. And it was a very meaningful exchange. And I'm thinking that way now. Who have I not talked to the longest? What amount of time is the longest amount of time that I have that's gone by me talking with someone? I'm going to call that person and talk to that person just for a few minutes. And I felt better the rest of the day. I don't know how he felt, but I felt. But once he figured out which Uncle Mark I was, maybe he felt better. I felt better because I had that connection with a kid. He's 35, who's having genuine struggles in his life, and I think need to know that his relatives care about him. So let me ask this question. I've talked about this before here, but I want to bring it up again. Is it a sin to be anxious? Let me read. You know this passage. We talk about it quite a bit. Philippians 4. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. Now, let me read it again. Philippians 4. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. I'm talking about that a lot. Before you answer that question, think that's what the Bible says, right? So is it a lack of faith if you're anxious right now? Is a lack of faith that you're having all these emotions? Well, let's talk about that for a few minutes. The amygdala, which has a lot to do with the emotional part of the brain, is much, much faster than the neocortex. Now, the neocortex is the thinking part of the brain. That's where you think through stuff. The amygdala is the feeling part of the brain where it reacts and it reads emotions quite quickly. We've done quite a bit of research trying to separate out these two areas of the brain. We can show people pictures that are so fast that look at this screen, the picture will flash on and flash off. It's so fast that the neocortex doesn't register it. So you don't even know you see it. So I can flash a picture now that's so fast that your brain sees it, the amygdala sees it, but the neocortex doesn't see it. It's called subliminal, influence. You know this goes on, right? So we showed people pictures that they would flash a picture of an anxiety-provoking situation or a fearful situation, a situation of an angry face of someone. And the subjects immediately felt those feelings, even though they don't even know that they saw a picture. Do you get what I'm going at? So I can stimulate the fear centers of your brain, the anxiety centers of your brain, the anger centers of your brain, and do it without you even knowing it, because the picture comes on and off and you didn't even know that you saw something. So the subjects ironically flash these pictures and the subjects go, well, you, to the researcher, you're looking kind of angry right now, or wow, this situation here seems really, I'm getting kind of nervous in this situation. So we can create feelings in people without them knowing that we're doing it. What's the point? The feeling part of the brain is about 5 times faster than the thinking part of the brain. If you're going to pick up on cues of anxiety and fear in the environment, you're going to pick those cues up 5 times faster than you're going to be able to think about it. Now, a psychologist by the name of Kahneman wrote a book about this called Thinking Fast and Slow. He got the Nobel Peace Prize in economics, and he's a psychologist. Go figure, right? Because he was able to predict people's behavior. He knows how the brain works. And why do people do what they do? Because of how they feel, not because of what they think. I've got some very sad news for you. You're not rational. You're rationalizing, meaning you've got a feeling about something and you really know it's true. And then you look for reasons why you believe what you believe. The feeling part of the brain directs your behavior much, much more than the thinking part of your brain. And so Kahneman wrote this whole book. It's a great book. You should read it. It's easy to read. Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman. And he talks about the 2 roads in the brain. There's the immediate fast road where we have an immediate reaction. And then there's the long road where we then think through, well, what do I really believe? And what are my values? And what do I think I should do here? And that's the long road to making decisions. But the fast road usually happens very, very, very quickly. Now, you know the ramifications of this. We're going to get out and vote based on our fear and our anxiety, more so than what we believe. You vote because you're afraid. Politicians know this. That's why both sides accuse the other side of fear mongering, because they know that if you gen up a lot of fear, people are going to go do something. Decisions are made. Anybody who's in sales, any of you who are in sales, you know why people make their decisions, because you stimulate a need, you get them to feel something, probably anxiety or fear, and they're going to make a decision based on that, more so than what they think. Now, some of you rely on the slow part of your brain more than others. And so you'll know, gosh, I really want to buy that car. Whoa, let me think about that. I should really think the consequences through. And then the slow part, the thinking slow part of the brain, you can include that. But my point is this: in a situation like we've got now, the anxiety that you feel is automatic and it's not a choice. The stuff that's going on around you that make you feel anxious or depressed or afraid is stimulating that part of your brain so quickly that you giving yourself reasons why you shouldn't be afraid or shouldn't be anxious or shouldn't be nervous or shouldn't worry doesn't do a lot. Because there's every day, if you're looking at the news or on social media, every day somebody's saying something to trigger your fear and anxiety, which is why I said last week, stop watching the news, just turn it off. Stop looking at social media. Look a little bit, but don't do it as much as you're doing, because it just keeps triggering your amygdala. Your amygdala is firing overtime and you're scaring the heck out of yourselves and making yourself feel anxious. And there isn't enough time for you to slow down and have the thinking part of your brain kick in and be more rational about the life that you've got and the good things in your life going forward.
Mark?
Yes.
Just to validate your point on this, I'm a lawyer in civil litigation. There's a huge movement right now among the plaintiffs' bar, I primarily represent defendants, of something called reptile theory. And reptile theory, I don't know if you've heard about it, but it prioritizes the listener's safety over everything else. It's all about self-preservation. So instead of asking a witness, was what happened reasonable, the theory encourages the lawyers to say, was that the most safe that the conditions allowed? Of course, if we had the most safety, our entire lives would be on Zoom. We'd all be in our homes, assuming that our homes were safe. I only say this to bring home to you, it looks like you recognize it, but to others who might not, that this whole prioritization of absolute safety translates, I think, into a sense of absolute anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
At some level, everybody is in some kind of peril,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be the peril of my sprained knee, or my sore shoulder, or the peril of not having enough to eat, or food insecurity, whatever it is. I only bring this up, Mark, to reinforce that your observations have real world commercial and professional consequences, and I believe anyway that this kind of distorts this sense of safety and consequent sense of peril is really distorting our interactions between one another, I think.
I absolutely agree. It's a reptile theory based on what we call the reptilian brain or the emotional brain.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
There are levels in the brain, and evolutionary science would say the old brain, the reptilian brain, is the more emotional brain. That's kind of what I'm saying. It reacts faster, and we know that, and we need to appreciate that. I agree with you. I think what you're saying is it's a mistake for us to say, oh, well, let's all just privilege the reptilian brain. I don't think we should privilege it. I think we need to know how to manage it and understand it, which is why I wrote my latest book, Managing Your Emotions for a Healthier Life. It's an updated version of spiritual wisdom for a happier life that came out a couple of years ago. We need to know how to address our emotions to have a healthy life. That doesn't mean we should always live by them. I don't think you should privilege just living by your feelings, but I think you need to understand them in order to live a healthy life. Absolutely. Let's fold that in. And I think it's a mistake for us to think that the priority is safety, because I agree with you, Hall. We're never going to be safe. We need to know how to have courage to live with a life that isn't safe, which is what I'm going to talk about. What's our response here for all us to look for safety? That'd be a mistake. The response is for us to be people of courage in an anxiety-provoking world, and recognize how the brain works, recognize how we are made. It is not an accident that your emotions play a huge role in your life. So thanks, Hall. Anytime you want to support my point, please jump in. Anyone else is welcome to do that as well.
Well, I got a question for you. Is that in terms of anxiety, I don't know if it's possible to make an objective comparison, but are we more or less anxious as a culture than we were 40 years ago?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know anyone who has measured that. We've been measuring anxiety, but typically it's a self-report measure, so that wouldn't give you the answer to that. Because we could ask people today how anxious they are and say, 40 years ago, I might have been very, very anxious that Russia was going to blow me up. And it's a self-report. I don't know how we would compare that. I don't know the answer to that.
Because we can measure, and I in my universe, it's easily measured that risk, acceptance of risk has gone down significantly.
Okay.
Last 40 years.
Interesting.
And that what we used to consider acceptable risk in airplanes and acceptable risk in cars and acceptable risk in engineering, in the engineering universe, what used to be acceptable risk taking 40 years ago is completely unacceptable today.
Yeah, there might be a lot of variables on why that's true, but are people more or less anxious? I don't know.
Yeah, and my curiosity is, as we've lowered our risk, have we also increased our anxiety?
Right. That's Hall's point. Yeah, I don't know. I've heard a lot of people say that there's more division in our political parties now than there's ever been. I'm thinking, well, we had a civil war. I would say that was worse, don't you think? When we were actually killing each other because we were so mad at each other. I mean,
Is it at the risk of disagreeing with you, of course, is it really fair to say that the problem of anxiety is only based on self-reporting? And the problem, of course, with self-reporting is that's influenced by a lot of factors, right? So there are political circumstances, there's a person's personal circumstances, there's media, all the stuff. But for example, as I understand the work done since March, I think 1 in 4 kids from 18 to 24, or maybe 14 to 24, have seriously considered suicide. Now, while that's self-reporting, it's not the self-reporting in response to the question, are you anxious? So there might be other indicia. I mean, for example, I haven't seen studies on this, but I hear anecdotally that substance abuse is much higher since March than it had been historically. Interestingly, one of the things you haven't heard much about is opioid-related deaths, where that was all the buzz about 18 months ago. You haven't heard too much about it, at least I haven't, since March. So I just would encourage, as you think about this for your next presentation, to maybe look at these other less direct indicators of anxiety, because I know in my circles, based on those kind of things, I would report that there's increased anxiety since March. Now, to Jody's point about over the decades, I would say I haven't seen research on that, and I don't know if that exists, and it would be a very useful PhD for some budding scholar to investigate, assuming that the parameters by measuring anxiety were credible.
Yeah, so those 2 different questions. Is anxiety up because of COVID, or is anxiety up because of culture over decades? Those are 2 different questions. And yes, I think after this, looking backwards, we're going to see higher suicide rates, higher anxiety, higher depression. All that's going to spike because of COVID. Absolutely. I have no doubt about that. So the question for us is, so what? So what are we going to do? What are you going to do because of anxiety in your life right now? That's kind of our question. And when I went to seminary, I believed that verse in Philippians. Don't be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition and thanksgiving, present your requests to God. So I guess we're not supposed to be anxious if you're spiritual people, right? It's kind of what it says. And so when I went to...
Is that how you really read it?
Well, that's what it says. Do not be anxious about anything. Right?
Yes, but I've always read it from childhood as, here's the antidote to anxiety.
Right.
Prayer.
But I would say across Christendom, people have presented themselves as more spiritual if they're less emotional. What does it mean to be? And the images of Jesus are always, he's very calm. People are running around crazy all around him. Nothing gets to him. So that's how you're supposed to be. You're supposed to be above it all. I mean, it's you and God against the world, right?
The holiness movement was like that, yes.
Yes. That we're supposed to really be above it all. And if your relationship with God is good enough, then stuff isn't going to bother you. So I go to seminary, world-renowned theologians and psychologists are there. A guy by the name of Richard Gorsuch came to Fuller Seminary at that time. He authored the most used psychological measure of anxiety in our country, and he was the editor-in-chief of the Journal for the Scientific Study of Religion. Perfect guy to research this with. So I joined forces with him, and we created a research study to test this. So we have a measure of religiosity. We've got the intrinsic, extrinsic measure of religiosity. Intrinsic means I live my faith. Extrinsic means I'm religious for extrinsic reasons. I go to make social connections. I go because my parents want me to go. I go because my people always gone to church, which is different from people who go because it's intrinsic to the way they live their life. So we're trying to sort out the true believers, right? Intrinsic versus extrinsic religious. We got the measure of anxiety. Richard Gorsuch has co-authored this. Perfect. So then I joined forces with a summit expedition kind of training camp where they take people out in the wilderness and just stress the heck out of them. They throw them off mountains with ropes tied around them. It's a sport called rappelling, believe it or not. They leave them out in the desert overnight, give them a knife and say, good luck, we're going to pick you up tomorrow sometime. Just stress them to death. Perfect. So we're going to measure their religious orientation, measure their anxiety level before we send them out in the desert, try to kill them. Then we measure their anxiety level right afterwards. And you know what we found? We thought it's perfect. We're going to find out that the truly religious people are out there talking to God and, you know, being like Jesus in the desert, and nothing's going to get to them. And you can imagine what we found, right? When you stress the heck out of someone, they get anxious and they lose their religion. So it really doesn't matter what your religious orientation is. If I stress you enough, you're going to get anxious. I was very disappointed. So your religion doesn't make any difference at all? Well, not then, not in the event. When life is coming at you really hard, when life is really scaring you to death, when your amygdala is firing overtime, you're going to get anxious. And what you believe and what you think gets trumped by the danger of the situation. We then measured their anxiety level 2 weeks later, and you know what we found? The intrinsically religious oriented people were no longer anxious, and everybody else still was. So what does that tell you? Exactly what Jody was saying. The Bible gives you a method to deal with your anxiety. It doesn't prevent it. Religion doesn't prevent anxiety. A relationship with God doesn't prevent anxiety. Nothing can prevent anxiety. It's a lower brain response to danger in life. You will get anxious when the circumstances are bad enough. But what your relationship with God does do is it gives you a way of making sense of danger in life so that your anxiety will come back down. So it's a way for us assimilating stress and difficulty and anxiety into our life, not a way of preventing it. So Jody's right. The correct reading of that verse is not, do not be anxious. It's like, listen, when you are anxious, don't worry about it. With everything, by prayer and petition and thanksgiving, present your requests to God. You've got a God you can go to when things hit the fan. There's a place where you can go that's a real relationship with a real God that will help you make sense out of the difficulties in your life. It is not a sin to be anxious, not at all. It is an artifact of having this reptilian brain, or the amygdala. It's an artifact of having a brain that responds to anxiety before you can even think. But once you have that response and your life gets stressful and you do feel anxious, you've got a God you can go to and a people you can go to manage your anxiety in a healthy way. The other people were still stressed out. The extrinsically religious people and the non-religious people, they were like, oh my gosh, I almost died out there. I could have died out there in the wilderness. Those idiots could have killed me. That Dr. Baker is a fool. He should not be allowed to do that to people because I almost died. They were still worried, still upset, still anxious, not able to assimilate it. But the people who had an intrinsic relationship with God were able to talk to God in a way that made them realize, hey, I can make sense out of this. My life with you is important. Even if I had died, I'd be in heaven right now. We have ways of making sense of our anxiety that trumps the anxiety itself.
Mark,
this is,
I have a,
yeah,
sorry,
Alice.
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, please.
So recently, for the past few months, I have a couple of Buddhist friends, and we get together. They're not religious. They're anyway, but we get together and we meditate together on Zoom. And one of the things I'm finding slowly with this whole thing that's happening, whether it's political or the medical issues, is that I think it's really important for me to, instead of looking at the anxiety as something that's looming out here, to actually go into it and sit with it. And when I do that, it's no longer my enemy. It's actually something that is asking to be with it and to be heard and to tend to it. And that always brings my anxiety down. It's like facing my own death. You know, I used to be so afraid of death, and I've been reading books about it. And the more I am in connecting with it, like the latest book I'm reading now, it's called The 5 Invitations by someone who's a hospice person for the past, I don't know how many decades. And he wrote this book, and the more I look at death, even, I mean, the worst, my worst fear, death, whether it's physical or death of whatever I believe in, it takes away that angst. It takes away that kind of fear of, oh my gosh, I need somebody outside to help me out, or I need God to fix it for me. God is working with me, but I need to also not be afraid to. I mean, that's what Jesus did. He was very emotional. I think he was emotional. He grappled with fear and death and all of those things. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
I agree with you. I think that the Buddhist philosophy, and interesting you said they're not religious. There are religious Buddhists and non-religious Buddhists, but there's a religious philosophy that I think gets at the core of what I'm saying, which is it takes courage to face your feelings in life. And the Buddhists have all these techniques, age-old techniques, thousands of years old techniques of how to sit with your own emotions. And yes, I think that's what Jesus did. You know, he was Hebrew, not Greek. We're more Greek in the way we think about stuff. And he was very much a man who was present with himself. And that's our model, is to be present with our feelings. Fighting your feelings makes it worse. And the Buddhist philosophy they have some great techniques on how to sit with your own emotions rather than fight them. And I think often in the Christian church, we have not privileged emotion. We've thought that's a sign of weakness or a lack of spirituality to be over emotional, and we really need to be more zen and not upset about stuff. And I think that's a mistake. I think fighting your emotions will make them worse, but figuring out how to manage them, express them, and I think in community talk about them is our way, I think, of addressing those feelings. So anxiety then is a warning signal to be paid attention to, not fought, and not seen as a weakness. It's a mistake to think that people are over emotional. I get that a lot. In marriage counseling, people will come in and he'll say, oh, she's over emotional. I rarely find anyone's over emotional. What I find is that there are a number of people who feel shame for being emotional. That creates a problem. If you have shame for having whatever feeling you have, then that feeling is not going to come out in a useful way in your communications with other people. And that's what looks over emotional. People become clingy, or they become angry, or they overexpress themselves, not because they're too emotional, but because they feel shame for having those emotions. So to Alice's point, the Bible tells us how to address stress in our life. This is from Romans 5. We know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. There it is. Suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. This is a profound instruction for us for our lives now. How are we to face the anxiety that you can't control? It's going to happen to you. Anxiety is never going to go away, but you can manage it, you can address it, you can look at it, you can talk about it. And one is to have the courage to understand what this verse is saying. Suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. Now, the first thing you need to understand is perseverance is different than patience. Patience is waiting. Perseverance is doing something while you're waiting. So it's very important to know that distinction. So here my life is coming at me. COVID is coming at me. I'm suffering. I'm anxious. What's the response? It's an opportunity for you to persevere. And what does perseverance look like? Perseverance means you get up in the morning, you wash your face, you suit up for the day, at least half suit up so you can do Zoom, and you face your life with courage. I'm going to deal with it today. I'm not going to wait for God to do something. I'm not going to wait for somebody else to do something. Patience is good and patience is necessary, but patience is not perseverance. Perseverance is you actively looking for something good to do today, and you accept that challenge. If I do that, rather than just waiting, although waiting's good, if I'm persevering, meaning I'm looking for good today, you will develop character. You will become a person of character, a person who has integrity, a person that can be counted on in tough times, a person who knows I'm going to do something to face difficulty in my life. And that's what a person of character means. Your character is what draws me to you, and my character is what draws you to me. What are the qualities you have that I want to be around? It's someone I want in the foxhole with me during difficult times. Someone who's looking around, not for somebody else to do something, but looking around for what they can do to make life better for themselves and for the people around them. That's a person of character. And if you have that, you will understand what true hope is. Now, the Bible has a lot to say about placing our hope in God. And I don't think we understand really the nuance there that I think is important. What does hope mean? That I'm hoping my life's going to get better. I think we often mean it that way, but there's a quality of hope that has doubt. Like, I hope I see you later, or hope things get better. There's also a quality of hope that isn't about predicting a beautiful future, but a quality of hope that has to do with focusing on the present. What I think true hope is, when the Bible talks a lot about our hope is in God, what it's saying is, I'm looking for God in my life today. And if you're looking for God in your life today, you're going to be a hopeful person, as opposed to someone who's hoping for some future event. So this is the courageous life that I think we're challenged to live. We face our suffering. We recognize that we have anxiety. And the way I face that is to look for something good to do. And by doing that, I'm partnering with God, becoming a person of character, and realizing that my true hope is looking for God in my life today. Not that God will get me out of this, or God's going to do something in the future, or God's going to, make me a millionaire 2 years from now when this COVID thing is over. That's not true hope. That's wishful thinking. True hope is I'm looking to partner with God today and find what good and constructive and meaningful thing can I do today. And that kind of hope makes me the kind of hopeful person that people want to be around. There's something positive about my attitude because I'm optimistic about my environment. How can I be optimistic today in COVID? Because I'm looking around for opportunities for God. I'm looking for moments where God's going to show up. Martin Buber's whole theology, when he talked about the I-thou relationship, was if I am authentically how I'm created to be, and you're authentically the way you are created to be, God shows up. That's his theology. God shows up in those moments. And it doesn't matter if you're Buddhist or you're Christian or you're atheist, you're agnostic. God's still going to show up because you're created in the image of God. I don't have to end every conversation I have with a prayer just to remind people that this was all about God. All I have to do is be my authentic self. And because they were created in the image of God, if they are their authentic self, we believe God shows up. God shows up in those moments, and something happens that's bigger than us. Something happens that's miraculous because it's bigger than you and me. It's a synergistic moment that happens, and I don't even need to mention it because it's happening probably in the part of the brain that doesn't address the prefrontal cortex anyway. There's something that's happening here that feels almost magical when it's authentic. And I think that magic is actually miraculous, that God shows up in those moments. So this is actually an opportunity for us. The crisis that we're in now, the way I look at it, is an opportunity for us to be people of courage who are going to show up. We recognize that anxiety is universal. It's never going to go away. Anxiety signals us to danger. We're the kind of people who are willing to face danger in life, and we can do that because we're partnering with God. I'm not alone. God is with me in this, and I will look for ways for him to support me in this as I try to be the best person I can be in the midst of my suffering times. And that doesn't mean that I'm going to be perfect. I'm going to show up at restaurants without my mask too, because I'm a human being, but I'm going to still try to be my most authentic version of myself in it.
Mark, there's a fascinating intersection here to three ideas that you've expressed. One is the problem of losing religiosity during the moments of stress. I'm struck by Saint Stephen, who in a moment of profound stress, as he was about to be stoned to death and ultimately was, nevertheless did not lose his religious convictions. Second, I do not think we can ignore making ourselves available to the Holy Spirit in this context because, and this getting to your third point, it is through the Spirit, at least in Acts, that that sense of courage was transferred from the Father to us. And I know it may sound kind of, hokey pokey, and we call it the Holy Ghost or the Holy Spirit, and that then offends our sense of scientific awareness. And yet, nevertheless, when you were saying miraculous, you're a person of science, you weren't saying miraculous casually or to excuse the ability of science to explain something. The miraculous is that which is inexplicable. And I could not help but thinking as I listened to you that we should all go back and read Acts and see how just ordinary people did not lose their sense of religious conviction and faith in the midst of some of the most profound stress that we could imagine. Imagine being put in prison and then having the prison explode and you scurrying out of it as Paul did, and yet not for a moment did he lose his religious faith.
Absolutely. I think there are those who have been through so much in life. Paul was one of them, who was absolutely convinced he knew the answer. Now, do I think he was anxious? Yeah, I do. But do I think he was absolutely certain that God was with him in it, which is where our true hope is? Not that God's going to get us out of it, but God's going to be with us in it. That's our true hope. Yes, I think he felt that. When you have that conviction, then you don't lose your religious conviction. You're steadfast. I know God is with me in this. That is what gives us the strength to deal with trauma. We know in psychology the difference between psychological injury and psychological trauma. A psychological injury is an overwhelmingly frightening act that becomes traumatic if we have to deal with it alone. That's what produces psychological trauma. You can be overwhelmed and it not become traumatic because there was someone with you in it. There was someone there mitigating the emotions and helping you regulate and manage your emotions. It is being alone in our injury that creates trauma. We, people of faith, have the greatest antidote to psychological trauma that anyone could have, that God is with us in it. And this, we believe, is real. It's not a fiction. It's real.
Mark,
yes, Alice.
You know, the other thing that's really, for me, powerful is, especially, I know we don't want to talk about it, but it's in here, it's in our lives. The political situation, who's president, what's going to happen, you know, whether, and these, of course, you know, me, liberal, blah, blah, blah. But the thing that I find so fascinating as you were talking is that if we truly believe that God is really working in our lives, not just, you know, what I believe, but all of us, then from the Buddhist perspective, again, is to detach from the outcome of what we think should happen. So for me, you know, in the beginning, I was like, oh my God, here's Biden, he poor guy, he's trying to do his job and they're not letting him and blah, blah, blah. That wasn't getting me anywhere. So right now I'm thinking, you know what the bigger picture is, God is working in this in ways that none of us can understand. And to trust that process to the point where I detach, so that if Trump decides he wants to do another 4 years, I'm fine. That means that the universe needs to learn more. There's something going on beyond us. And when I do that, it frees me from labeling and from attaching to things that are unrealistic from my little viewpoint, you know, right. Little Alice in Pasadena that knows nothing, basically.
Right.
So it may be that our democracy or whatever, you know, or we rebel, well, I don't know what the hell's going to happen. But I think that in God's eyes, it's like almost the universe needs to have this movement of transformation, transition, whatever needs to happen in ways I will never understand. So I can only do my part and just release the rest.
Right. I think there's great wisdom in surrendering the outcome. A great little book, maybe you've already read it, by Thich Nhat Hanh, called Living Buddha, Living Christ. And he compares Christ in Buddhist philosophy. It's really well written, and there's a lot of tremendous insights in that. What are the Buddhist philosophies that really parallel the teachings of Jesus? I think there are many great insights that we could benefit. And one is that we would say trust God. They would say detach. I would say the opposite of detach. I would say connect to God. I'm trusting God in the outcome, but it's the same attitude, right? I'm not trying to control the universe with demanding the outcome be a certain way. If my guy doesn't win, I'm really going to be angry and scared and frightened. And what's that? You're right. What's that going to get us? I'm going to trust God for the outcome.
Mark, can I ask another question?
Yeah, Laura.
It's not so much a question as, can you speak into a little bit more of this aspect? You touched on it earlier. I'm thinking about the connection between anxiety and fear and the way that it sometimes gets labeled as a lack of faith. Like if you feel anxious or if you feel afraid, all you need to do is pray about it or counter it with faith and it'll go away.
Right.
Or if you feel this way, if you feel anxious or afraid, then you don't have faith.
Right.
And I think we know in our lived experience that that's not necessarily true, but it also is difficult to get away from that messaging or to feel like it, like, is it true? Am I, like you said, is it a sin to be anxious? You know,
Right.
Is it a sin to be afraid? Is it a sin to, anyway, fill in the blank. So could you speak a little bit more to that, this connection between faith and the role that faith plays in alleviating anxiety or the back and forthness of all of that?
Right. Yeah. I think it's really important because I do think that is a dilemma. And I think most people who call themselves Christians interpret that passage in Philippians as you're not supposed to be anxious. And that's where we get that. And really the reason I wanted to study that verse when I went to seminary is because it wasn't my experience. I see very godly people getting anxious and depressed and suicidal and having all kinds of problems. What I think, and over my decades of doing this as a Christian psychologist, I mean, it's on my advertising that I'm a Christian psychologist, so I get Christians to come to see me, and they come with these beliefs, right? It's been part of my mission is to disabuse them of that belief that having any feelings at all is somehow the absence of spirituality. You know, it's often still today often the case that the absence of sexuality is the presence of spirituality in the church. Well, that can't be true, right? The same thing is to do about emotionality. You know, if I don't have emotions, if I'm not sexual, then I must be spiritual. No, I think the presence of spirituality is an active and real thing, and it's not indicated by the absence of other things. And the more I have learned about how the brain operates, my appreciation for the presence of feelings, I now see that usually with intense depression, intense anxiety, intense worry, with whatever feelings are creating problems for our life, it's not the absence of faith that creates those problems. It's the presence of shame about having those feelings. If I'm ashamed of my depression, if I'm ashamed of my anxiety, if I'm ashamed of my worry, then it makes me want to hide it, and it gets worse. It's like screwing a pressure cooker lid down on your feelings, and they just get worse. And it's by disabusing people of the shame, and the church has done that. The church has said, well, you should be ashamed of yourself for feeling so bad when your child died, because it must be the will of God. No, it's not the will of God. I've heard people say that after the child dies. Well, it was the will of God. No, it was a tragedy. It was awful. You should be upset about it. You should be crying, not smiling. And embracing those feelings without shame allows the feelings to process over us. The thing about the reptilian brain is we were meant to have these feelings automatically and quickly, but we were not meant to live with them. They're meant to have them and have them go away, have them and have them go away. It's like standing in the breakers in the ocean. You can't stand there and have the waves beat up against you. Either get out into the water or get back on the beach. Your emotions are just meant to wave over you and move on. They're information to give us signals about our universe. Fear that guy, love that guy, get close to that person, get away from that person. You listen to the information and then move on. So once we see that, we're not at battle with our faith, should not be in battle with our emotions. Our faith is, what I'm telling you, a way of helping you process your emotions so they can wash over you and you can move on about your life in a mature way. That is my conviction. That Philippians 4 says to me, not that you should never be anxious. It's just saying when you are anxious, talk about it. Talk about it to God and others. Process it. You know, we have places we can go to deal with our feelings. and then they will wash over us and we'll move on in our life. So
Mark, sorry, one last thing.
yes,
Sorry,
Al.
sorry. So you know what about the vulnerability of our humanity? Jesus I just remember on the cross, he said, God, why have you forsaken me?
Yeah.
I mean, he even went through that of just letting, I mean, I love that because that gives me hope as a human being to be vulnerable and feel everything. And because
Amen.
that's where God is in the messiness of our going crazy and being afraid. Anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. He had the courage to be honest about how he felt in that moment too. There's our model. There's our model. It's not a sin to have anxious or even fear or feel abandoned. That's not a sin. Deal with it. And he did. And he said it to God. He said, why? Oh, to God, right? He was doing exactly what I'm telling you to do. Why have you abandoned me, you bad father? And then he gets his feet under himself, literally, and says, okay, whatever you want, your will be done. But he had the courage to admit how he felt. That's what I'm telling us to do, to process the feelings first with God and then with each other. I believe that the Christian model for health is psychologically brilliant. All we need, the principles are there. We have to interpret them, in modern life, but the principles are there for living a psychologically healthy life. We can deal with the stress and anxiety of COVID by following the example of Jesus, as Alice has once again said, brilliantly brings us to the point.
There's I forget which one of the several biographies I've read of World War II combat veterans who saw a lot of action in the war, but one of them was making the point that courage is not the opposite of fear. That he could name 50 different kinds of fear that he experienced, but courage is not the absence of feeling that. He said he lived through all of them.
Correct.
And so, but it does talk to being able to continue funcking, continue doing the right thing.
Yes.
Keeping your eye on the ball and I liked your phrase, be a people of courage.
Right.
And I embrace that. I think that we have potentially forgotten how to do that as a church, as a community of faith. We've potentially forgotten how to be a people of courage, and not think of that as being the opposite of fear, and not think of that as being the opposite of anxiety, but being a way, an ethic, a way of living, a way of being in the presence of anxiety and in the presence of fear.
That's right. We'll close on this. Paul Tillich's definition of courage is saying yes to your life in spite of the circumstances. It's that simple. I'm going to say yes today. I'm going to say yes to my life in spite of my circumstances. So that's your mission. Say yes to your life in spite of your circumstances. That's the definition of courage. Paul Tillich's anyway. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's show our appreciation.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you.